Welcome to Instant Deck Techs. The aim of this series is to give you a short, concise guide on how to build a certain deck. It won't cover every card, but we'll go through all the categories and go over the types of cards needed to make the deck work. Any card mentioned will be down in the description below. Fynn the Fangbearer is 1 and a green for a 1/3 legendary creature, human warrior with deathtouch. It also has the ability, whenever a creature you control with deathtouch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. A player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game. The aim of this deck is to kill our opponents with poison damage. We'll be running a lot of small creatures with deathtouch that with Fynn will scale so that we can pick them off. We'll then look at some other win conditions towards the end. Let's have a quick chat about creatures with Infect. Infect is another way that we can give our opponents poison counters. The difference in this deck is that Fynn gives creatures with deathtouch the ability to give 2 poison counters to opponent when they're dealt regular combat damage. A creature with Infect does its damage in the form of poison counters, so it doesn't deal regular combat damage, only poison. Because of this, we're not going to be running creatures with Infect for the sake of running creatures with Infect, but we'll run some in the relevant categories when they come up. The first section of this deck is small creatures with deathtouch. With our commander, it doesn't matter the power of the creature, they deal 2 poison damage regardless. These 6 here are the best by only costing 1 mana. After those, there are the 2-drop spells with deathtouch. I would want to run all of these so we have a critical density of them. There are plenty of other big creatures with deathtouch. With Fynn, however, no matter how much damage they do, the poison damage will be limited to 2. So if you want to run these as well as the smaller creatures and not instead of. Next up is our card draw. We'll be running a lot of creatures in this deck, so to go with those, we can run spells that draw us cards when either creatures come into play or we cast them. Next up for card draw is cards that give us card advantage from our creatures attacking or from us getting combat damage through. We're going to be attacking a lot with this deck, so these cards play into that strategy very nicely. On top of those, you can also run something like Harmonize, as it's just a solid green card draw spell. For the ramp, the majority of it is going to be on small mana dorks. The reason for this is that there are ways out there of giving creatures deathtouch, so the dorks will help get our threats out, and then when we're ready to win, they'll become threats themselves. I would want to run at least 8 mana dorks in this deck, and then anything on top of that can be your standard Soul Ring, Rampant Growth style packages. For our interaction, I would recommend splitting this 3 ways. The first part is creatures with deathtouch or Infect that answer our opponent's board, such as these. Next up is fight spells, punch spells, and pingers. Punches and pingers are generally better, as our deathtouch creatures will survive. But either way, the combination should clear the board quickly of any troublesome creatures. I'd also want to run a couple of bits of instant speed interaction, just so we have some answers on our opponent's turns. To a large extent, this deck very heavily relies around the commander, so as such, to stop our opponents disrupting our game plan, we want to run some spells to protect our board and our commander. The standard commander protection of Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves will be very important in this deck. The second part of the protection will be spells that can protect our whole board, with things like Heroic Intervention and Asceticism, good examples of this. The next section of the deck will be token makers. First up in this category is cards that make creatures with deathtouch, as more is always more. The fact that Hornet Queen and Hornet Mest makes flying deathtouchers will of course be exceptionally good. Phyrexian Swarmlord will scale nicely with our deck, as the closer our opponents get to dying, the more tokens it will spit out. With some additional token makers, you can always run Scoot Swarm and Avenger of Zendikar. These are really just backups to the rest of the deck, but they are very good. We'll also want to run some cards with Proliferate. These will help us out if our opponents ever mass a board state that means we have trouble swinging through. Any player with a poison counter is then always in trouble when we have something with Proliferate out, as we can sit there and take them up with Proliferate until they die when they have 10 poison counters. And then of course there is Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, which obviously gets out of hand very quickly with this deck. Moving on to some win conditions, the first section will be spells that give our creatures some form of evasion. The easier it is for our creatures to get through, the quicker we can deal those 10 bits of poison damage and win. Another way of winning is the old reliable Overrun and Hoof style effects. These buff spells mean that we can kill our opponents with regular damage as well. The fact they give all our deathtouchers trample as well is especially good, as when a creature with deathtouch gets trample, we only have to assign 1 point of lethal damage to a blocking creature and the rest tramples over to the opponent. And for those creatures in the deck that don't have deathtouch, we can give them it with Bow of Nylea. This and the previous effects should mean we should have no trouble finishing off our opponents. As we're a monocolored deck, we can run a decent amount of utility lands. Look for effects that we're already running in the deck, or things that the deck is missing. Cycling lands as well will help smooth out our draws. The next couple of deck techs on the channel will be focusing on the new commanders from Kaldheim, but after that we'll go back to viewers' requests. So if there's anything you want to see, please let us know down in the comments below, and subscribe so you see those videos when they come out. Thank you very much for watching.